Welcome to this video on shifts in the aggregate demand curve. This is discussed in detail in chapter 33, and there's a very nice summary table on this topic in that chapter. This video is part of SF3. So first we're going to discuss fiscal policy, and we'll start by writing out the components of aggregate demand. So aggregate demand equals consumption, plus investment, plus government spending, plus net exports. And the question we're going to ask is, if the government spends more money, G goes up, and there's a typo, so what happens to Y? So pause the video and answer that question for yourself real quickly. The obvious answer is that when G goes up, the right-hand side goes up. So the left-hand side, aggregate demand, or aggregate expenditure, or real GDP, they're all the same in equilibrium, will go up too. And the question is, how can such an elegant answer actually be wrong? The short answer is that the right-hand side depends on the stuff on the left-hand side. Consumption depends it's not just a fixed number, but it depends on the level of output, and the level of output expected in the future. And interest rates, and investment depends on interest rates and the level of output. So if you change G, and that influences interest rates and income, it can also influence the other variables. So in particular, it's actually possible that G can go up on the right-hand side and actually have no effect or very little effect on aggregate demand. Very few people would argue it has a negative effect. So the answer, it turns out, is right. The simple answer that when the right-hand side goes up, the left-hand side goes up. Almost all economists agree that that is accurate, but the story is actually a lot more complicated. And that's going to be the focus of a future video in SF6, I believe, and 7. For today, we'll focus on the simple story. So all you really need to know is that when G increases, aggregate demand curve will shift outward, and that's good enough for now, for this week. A second reason or way the government can influence the aggregate demand curve is through monetary policy. So suppose the Fed increases the money supply. What's going to happen to the interest rate? We can see on the graph below, the money supply shifts to the right. That lowers the equilibrium interest rate. How is that going to influence aggregate demand? Pause the video and remind yourself which aggregate demand components depend on the interest rate, and with lower interest rates, how are they going to be affected? So go ahead and pause it. Thanks for pausing. Let's go ahead and take a look at what happens. Consumption will increase because the interest rate is lower. You don't want to save as much because you're not getting as much interest. And investment will increase because loans are cheaper. Since those two components increase, you're going to see an outward shift in the aggregate demand curve. So there's two parts of the government, the Congress and the President, who decide how much the government's going to spend. That can directly influence aggregate demand by changing G. And the more important story for our purposes is that the Fed can change the money supply. When they increase the money supply, interest rates go down, aggregate demand shifts out because that's increasing the two important components, consumption and investment. So here's two questions. Remember, these questions are critically important. They're much more important than actually the process of watching the video because they'll help you form connections in your brain where you'll remember this information a few weeks later when you're taking the exam. Thanks for watching.